Um, Very good. Doug, take it away.
All right, I'm trying to see if I can get rid of this side screen here. There we go. There we go. All right. Well, welcome everybody. As many in Lima know that the Genesee Wesleyan Seminary is an institution that's largely been overlooked, even though it was indeed the first coeducational school in the United States in 1832. Now, I found out an interesting thing as I was putting all this together. I Googled the first coeducational institution in the United States, and it came up with a small college in Ohio that opened up in 1833 with only 89 students. So I'm going to get a hold of Google and see if we can't get this rectified, because the Genesee Wesleyan Seminary opened up in 1832 with 289 males and 111 females. So now we're going to see if I can go to the next slide. Okay, hang on while we, oh, there we go. All right, now we should be looking at a view of the Genesee Wesleyan Seminary up on Seminary Hill, but I'm actually, oh, I don't know. I had a map of Lima showing where the seminary was up on the hill, but apparently that disappeared someplace. So anyhow, this is a view of the seminary from behind Rochester Street. We know it's after 1910 because the gym has been built. That was built in 1909. I think it's an amazing look at how rural Lima was at that time. There was a lot of farmland. And we'll go on to the next one. This is a great photograph showing the seminary on the hill. Can you guys see my pointer?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Here's the Methodist Church, Methodist Episcopal Church, Presbyterian Church. And look at the barns that we had and the wide open land. I took a photograph of this, a similar photograph of this from the Mark Tubbs Park in Lima. And you can pretty much see the same view. Of course, everything's growing up now and the leaves are on the trees when I took the photograph, but it was the same general view. And it was amazing how much you could see from that far away. Now, this is an early photograph of the seminary because we don't have the porches on yet. That wouldn't come until about 1890. Now, a lot of people wonder what these are. They're not really giant birds. They're ornaments that they put on the chimneys of the seminary building to keep the birds away, I'm assuming. And that would be the only possible thing it could be. You see so many chimneys because when this was built, when the seminary building, or as we call it, the administration building is the most common term. When the administration building was built in 1832, it existed until 1842 when it burned down. Well, luckily they built on exactly the same location. In fact, the bottom stone front here is from the original seminary building that burned in 1842. Now there's over 100 rooms in the seminary building. This is, of course, College Hall. Let me go on to the next one. Here's a very interesting view of the houses around the seminary. Again, we're before 1890 because there's no porch. And this, I believe, either is or will become Park Street in Lima. This is the Thomas home. And one of the problems I have as a historian and someone who used to live in Lima, my references are all from the 1960s. So when I say the Thomas home, that's what it was to me. I have no idea who owns it now, But this is such an interesting photograph. Look at all the fences that were around, and look at the rural. You can see here corn, so everybody was growing a lot. Now we come to, whoop. Oh, hey, I can use my, okay, back again. Here the porches have finally been added. Lima has always been great. I should have stated in the beginning, there was competition for where the Genesee Wesleyan Conference would build their educational facility. Perry, Batavia, Honeoye, not Honeoye Falls, but Henrietta, several other towns bid for it. Lima bid for it and raised $11,000. That was not the highest raise, but Lima was chosen because it was considered a town that would be free of the abstractions and of bigger towns. In other words, they wanted a nice, quiet community where the people could, where their students could come and learn without being distracted by some of the things offered by larger towns. It was also the support of the people that convinced them to locate here. Throughout the entire history of the seminary, the Lima population has always supported them, and it's worked out quite well. This, of course, is the Methodist Cemetery across from the college. Again, another example of the agriculture that was going on at the same time. Another one showing how everybody had a barn because most people kept at least one cow for some milk. Does anybody know where this photo was taken from? It's where the library is today. The library would be over in this position here, and this is that hill behind the library, which always seems to have deer on it whenever I'm up there. Here was the picture I was looking for at the beginning. This is the Genesee Wesleyan Seminary, atop College Hill or Seminary Hill, depending upon who was calling it what at one time. Over here, we see Rochester Street going into Honeoye Falls. Another beautiful village photograph showing all the fields that were there. And of course, it's all houses now, but this is the way it looked back then. And you can still see the giant birds up here on the chimneys. I forgot to say that when the administration building was built, it was specified that there would be an outlet for a wood stove in every room. Well, they couldn't have a chimney in every room, so what they simply did is a room would have a pipe in it that went to a central pipe that's then connected to one of these chimneys. This is probably the most familiar photograph of Genesee Wesleyan Seminary. It was taken about 1952. And here we see aids for the early aviators. That points north. This tells them they're in Lima. And I think you can see the cars here. And it was taken by DeWolf. I can't remember his first name. I think it was Harry DeWolf. He took all the aerial photographs around Livingston County area back then, and they're still available for sale by his daughter. This is Elim Bible Institute today, the successor to the Genesee Wesleyan Seminary. We owe them a debt of gratitude. They've kept the buildings up as well as they possibly can with a very limited budget. If you were a kid in the 60s, this is where we ice skated during the winter time. This is from the Elim Bible Institute publication they put out in 1983, but it's a good view of all the original buildings And of course, here we have the administration building, which we've been looking at. Out behind it is called Washington Hall. That would become the laundry and print shop. Later, the print shop would be moved over here to the gymnasium, which was built in 1910. We have College Hall, built in 1851. We have the Music Hall in 1925, Blake Hall, 1912, and the President's Residence. All these buildings are still there with the exception of the men's dormitory. Most people don't know that they had a separate men's dormitory and just how big it was. It unfortunately burned down. But here is a Sanford map showing the men's dormitory, boys dormitory, College Hall, and you see here where it tells you that it has heating. And we go up here, and this was a wooden warehouse. That's what the HO stands for. Out here is the ice house, the refrigerator, and then your storage building. Here we have a cistern. These are water closets. Over here was the print shop originally, but this is the way it looked in 1897, unfortunately, and this was a beautiful building. It could house quite a few men. But unfortunately, back in those days, they were still using kerosene in many places. Even if the building had electricity, somebody usually had a kerosene-filled lantern or globe someplace, and it burned. Just 2 years after it was built, it was a terrible blow to the institution. They estimate the loss at $50,000, which would be $15 million in today's money. One student was killed. A student by the last name of Rollins jumped out of a second-story window, and he must have hit the ground wrong because he was killed instantly. But that was the only loss of life. The fire actually started in the basement. So that gave all the people that were in there at the time some ability to get out before things got really bad. Now I'm going to show you a few slides here that some of you may know, some may not. This is called the magic lantern projector. These were very popular from the 1840s all the way up until the 1940s. At one time, about 1926, New York State Educational Department made a lot of magic lantern slides of some of the areas in Livingston County. There's quite a few of the red salt mines. There's a few on the butter making at the Cohocton Creamery in Cohocton, New York, but they were a popular device to have in your classroom. Anyhow, this is what a magic slide looks like. They take a slide or an illustration, and they mat it between two pieces of glass. And so you're going to see a lot of upcoming photographs that have these round corners. That means it's a magic lantern slide. And here's one here. And we have Harold Harris out raking the lawn. I think it's a stage photograph because the tines are pointing up, or maybe it's a double-sided. But this is the original black and white photograph. They would then take that photograph and hand color it. Not such a great job on this, but this is how they did it. Somebody went in here and painted the colors in, and then they matted it, and that became your magic slide. And you have to remember that at the time this was used extensively, say around 1910 or so, this was pretty high tech. You didn't have color motion pictures yet. So seeing color up on a screen was a pretty big deal. Here's another magic slide. This is the Falling Hall. It was a gift from David Falling of Kenmore, New York. And at 1897, he gave it to him right after the boys' dormitory burned down. So that was great of him, and it certainly helped out. And here is a side picture to show you just how big this building was. They had quite a few rooms in there. This is a bedroom in Falling Hall up on the 3rd floor. pretty Spartan, but I'm sure these are all photographs that were staged at the time, so they cleaned up whatever clutter young men might have in their rooms. And here's a picture of it today. Unfortunately, the beautiful porch is gone, but that porches are a big casualty in old buildings. Because they're exposed so much to the elements, they're the first to go, and they don't have the money to replace them as they were. Jasmine Willis, just as an aside, she was a former journalist. She posts a lot of pictures in Southern Tier Scenery Facebook page. And here's the Valley Hall in relationship to the administration building. Now, here's a photograph that I want to show you. These are the barns. When Syracuse University, College Hall, removed from the seminary, they were ordered by a court to turn over 99 acres, all their libraries and all their lab apparatus to the Genesee Wesleyan Seminary. So, and they also, they also turned over a $15,000 endowment fund, which was worth quite a bit of money then. But anyhow, they raised a lot of their own food up there. So these are the barns. They've been gone since the 50s. And we're going to move on to, this is another magic lantern slide that's been colored by hand. And they did quite a good job on this one. And it's really an extensive farm layout they had. Here are the barns from the back. And what I wanted you to see is all the chickens that are running around, the fences to keep the livestock from invading the campus. But the biggest feature on this, maybe some of you, probably Martha already knows it, this is the Honeoye Falls Lima Railroad. It ran right behind the seminary, and it's going over towards the hollow that is on College Ave. And after the railroad was discontinued many years later, the residents filled the hollow in mostly with garbage, but it kind of filled it up. But this is one of the few pictures we have showing the actual track of the Lima Honeoye Falls Railroad. And again, we see the gymnasium. So we get a good, that was built in 1909. The railroad existed until about 1916. So it's right in line with the time frame here. Here's some of the workers. Also, the seminary brought local jobs. Everyone who worked up there lived locally. This is a couple of their people, and you see the beautiful draft horses they had, and they're plowing the fields. They raised, and here's them in action with the fields. They raised corn and they raised wheat for their livestock. The wheat would have gone right down the road to Moran's feed mill, and it would have been ground into feed for their animals. These are dairy cows for their milk. Hard to see, but there's a horse underneath here. And of course, self-explanatory, the chickens and the corn cobs. The college also kept 4 riding horses exclusively for the females. Here is the administration building before the porches were added. And this is when College Street was still dirt. And of course, most of you will recognize our steps here going up. And now we have the porches added, made quite a architectural difference. Much better looking building. This is the seminary building today. Again, our friends at Elim have done a great job. I put this one on here because I wanted to give you a sense of scale. These were big buildings. The front of the building was 136 feet long by 96 feet down the side. And you can see you've got 4 stories plus the attic. This housed most of the students. It housed the cafeteria, the dining rooms. And here's a hallway inside of the seminary. And it looks pretty much that same way today. This is a little bit later photo, as you can see by the light bulbs. And here we have our rooms. Not too different, well, probably a lot different than what you would see today. There's no electronic instruments there, although they did have electricity. They were big on pennants. Everybody had their rooms loaded with pennants. This photograph here, and you'll see more as we go along, is courtesy of George Corby, courtesy of Kathy Gardner. George was her great uncle. George lived at the Corby homestead on Corby Road, which is in Lima, but George was definitely a Honeoye Falls boy. He went to Honeoye Falls High School, graduated, and then went up to Genesee Wesleyan Seminary for a couple of years, and then he went to Cornell. But we have George to thank for some of the most wonderful photographs we've ever seen of the Wesleyan Seminary, and more day-to-day photographs. Again, with the pennants, and here we can see steam heat. So by now we've gotten rid of any of the wood stoves, and it probably would have gone into right here. Another corner of the room with their tennis rackets. And here there's not much extra space. And of course, this is a staged photograph, but what makes it so great, and this is what historians love, there's a year on here. Plus, we know that George was a student up there, 1913, 1914. So it works out really great. But she's got an electric light. Here's another of the old time radiators when they went to steam heat. I do not know, because I don't remember. I took a tour of the seminary, 20 years ago. I was good friends with Joyce Neiswander, who was the Elim librarian. Her only job she ever had. She was there for 50 years, and they've named the building after her. But anyhow, she took me on a tour. I don't remember if the room still had the steam heat or not. And again, this is George's writing down in the bottom, and he says, this is Marjorie's room. And here's another one on her way to Cornell. And lots of pictures of the girls' room, so George did okay. This is the dining room. Again, these would be all local people. Although this guy here is a student. I know him, and he's a student because he's on the baseball team. When you look at all these pictures over and over again, you really get to recognize the people, and you can pick them out from other photographs. And again, it's all in the same time period. The only photographs that we've seen that are before 1890 are the ones of the exterior buildings, the administration building, College Hall. Those are before 1890. Everything else is 1890 up to about 1920. So we're in the same general time frame. This is, of course, is the faculty dining room. I've spent a lot of afternoons in antique shops looking for these. And what's interesting here is these are oil lamps. And that's a counterweight. They would pull the lamp down, fill it with oil, hoist it back up. And you can see the globes from the lamp itself. This is the general dining room. We have an interesting array of electric light bulbs up here. And again, another really great thing, class of 1914. So we know what year it was, no guessing. Now, this is Washington's birthday. And of course, all you historians already know, George Washington was virtually a god 100 years ago. He was just so elevated as being the father of the nation that they had these celebrations every year. Now, George was born in February, so we see the decorations here with the pines. Maybe it's left over from Christmas, or maybe they put it up especially for this. We see our staff in the, we see our staff in the back room here, and all our neatly dressed students. Now here's your cafeteria staff, or dining room staff, same Washington's birthday. This is a later one because now we've got the electric lights in here. We also have a sprinkler system that was put in a little bit. But one thing that disappeared was the stenciling that went around the dining room. So when they remodel, some things get lost. As we know with old houses, things get covered over. Now here's a great photograph of the brain freeze of the porches. And you can see the students milling around. And here's the women up on the upper part of the veranda. Now, this was George again. He writes ending of social hour. So apparently they they allowed the students to mingle in a social atmosphere after classes were over, but it ended at a certain time and you had to go home. Now, I don't know if one of these is George or if it was just George that took the picture, but this is how a lot of students got to school. They came, either their parents dropped them off, they came by buggies and got dropped off, or they rode their bicycles. The peak enrollment for Genesee Wesleyan Seminary was in 1851. They had over 1,063 students. That means not all of them could be housed at the seminary, and many of them boarded in town. And there's quite a few houses on Rochester Street that have additional rooms that would have been rented out to students at the time. Another one of George's pictures, and you can see what an excellent photographer he was. A beautiful setting for the College Hall and the administration building and Fowling Hall. And again, George is so nice to put dates on it. Now, this is what I call the second most photographed building in Lima. The first is the American Hotel downtown, but the second most photographed is College Hall, a truly impressive Greek revival. Now, here's another one of those magic slides that didn't go quite so well. They did try and color it in, but somehow during the process, it didn't come out crystal clear. Now, here's a later magic slide. Now, this was all colored in by hand. It's an amazing job. I'm assuming that this must have been quite a large negative for them to be able to go in and do the kind of detail with hand coloring that they've done. This is one of the courses. They offered two courses at Genesee Wesleyan Seminary. One was the scientific course and one was the classical course. And you can see here, these numbers represent the number of times you had to be at class each week. But you can see here, it's pretty rigorous. I mean, they've got algebra, they've got plane geometry, solid geometry, trig. I like this one, trig and surveying. They had physics, chemistry, English, college entrance. The Genesee Wesleyan Seminary was a kind of an in-between the one-room schoolhouse where you went to 8th grade and a college education. But when you look down the list of students, you will see names that are quite familiar to anybody from Livingston County. People who were in business, who owned stores, who ran something else. They sent their kids here to be educated beyond 8th grade so that they could come back and take over the business. Also, many of them went on to higher education after they lived here. One thing we can't get into tonight because there's just too many of them. There were many nationally and internationally known people who attended Genesee Wesleyan Seminary. Here is the chemistry lab, and this would have been in College Hall. Quite an extensive lab. This is one of my favorite photographs because the students are investigating telegraph, which in 1910 or 1913 was the primary way of communicating all across the United States. And if you knew telepathy, you were telegraphing, you were guaranteed a job. And here they are investigating, they call it wireless telegraph. Now, some of you may know that became radio. This is Marconi's apparatus here, and he developed it to send signals to ships at sea. Now, radio signals travel in a straight line, and the Earth's curvature is every 71 miles. So there was no way the telegraph signal, the wireless signal, could get to the ship, but it did, and they couldn't figure out why. It wouldn't be till later they figured out it was the ionosphere. The radio signals were going up to the ionosphere and then bouncing off it and coming back back to Earth to the ships. And this is exactly the way it works today, although satellites have taken over the task of rebounding all these signals. These two students here are investigating a miniature power plant. As you can see, we have a faucet over here providing the water stream to a turbine, which goes over here and runs the generator, which goes over here and produces electricity. So these guys were on it. And again, being co-educational, it actually meant co-educational in every field. Here we see 1913 biology class, and we see the girls in there along with the boys. Now here's a real interesting one. This is studying the bones of the foot. Well, not such a good idea. There's a hunk of radium in there, and she might want to get her big toe checked in about 30 years. But the girls were in on all the scientific courses. This is the accounting and typewriting class. And why do you see the men in there? Here was the young man that was at the dining room a few slides back. At that time, around 1913, most of the secretaries to men were other men. So the men had to learn how to type as well. And of course, we do see a few women in the class, and they would come to overtake the profession. Now, don't get excited, ladies, but they did have a domestic science class, which is not as sexist as it sounds. If you were a woman and you had a higher education and you became involved in a trade or a business, you were still the lady of the house. And after working all day at whatever your job was, you had to go home and make the meals. The husbands weren't quite into sharing the housework at that time, but this is a very interesting configuration here. These are like Bunsen burners underneath. So if they had to bake something, if they had to cook something, they would put their pan on this rack underneath this gas burner. And this way you didn't have stoves taking up so much room. Of course, they do have a stove in the background here for both heat and for cooking. Again, not sexist, it was just the way things were. In fact, any of you ladies up until the 1950s, remember we had those flimsy paper outlines for making clothes all over the house. My mother made a lot of our dresses, but back then the lady of the house made most of the clothing for their family. Go back just a second. Here we can see some more heat runs. Now, these I think are from the Lima Historical Society, and they're wonderful because somebody took the time to identify the people. And this really comes in handy when you're trying to actually determine the date, because we can look the people up by their names, find out where they lived and when. Look at this arrangement here. Everything they need for cooking is underneath. I worked in a restaurant years ago, well, 50 years ago. Restaurants are laid out the way they should be. Nothing's covered up in a cupboard. Everything is on a shelf where it can be easily accessed. And they were doing the same thing here. Another seamstress class, sewing class. They had a well-stocked library, and the library would have been over in College Hall. Another view of the library. This is the drawing class, although here it looks like they might be practicing penmanship, but this is part of the art room. Another shot, and this young man's getting to earn a few dollars to put towards his tuition. And again, we have a mixed class. Another art class where the men and the women are together. You have to remember, in those days, if you owned a business and you wanted to put an ad in the local paper, you probably had to draw the illustration yourself. So it was good to know how to draw. They were very big on the arts. Here we see a music class. And this looks like just a get together in one of the student lounges. This is up in the upper floor of College Hall. This is Professor Works. I went down to the University of Rochester, the Rushley's library, and that's where Professor Works and his family donated all his papers. And I was able to get some interesting photographs from some of the things he left there. But again, here we have a recital class for the date and the names. If you're a Lima person, you can recognize some of these last names here. Here's the college band, a little bit later photograph. They put on plays, lots of plays. There were fraternities and sororities at the seminar, which I don't have time to get into here because they were so prevalent, but they would put on plays and recitals up in the College Hall. And all these recitals, whether they be drama or music, were open to the Lima public. And you see quite a lot of references in the old Lima newspapers about how many people attended some of these. And here we have a joint public comedy, Mr. Bob. I'm rushing through some of these because I see by the clock we're getting on in time. I don't want to keep people. This is the top of the College Hall. This is the auditorium. It was also where religious services were taking place. They would have church services up here. They had a grand piano that they took up a collection for. And again, the people of Lima came through and they raised the equivalent of about $15,000 for this piano. But their real star was this guy over here. I have an entire listing of what this thing could do. There's not much it couldn't do. Maybe this is what Emerson, Lake, and Palmer were using, but it's quite an organ. And this is the back of the room. These are the pipes for the organ. Now you see here, I think some of you can guess, this is a radiator. It was the way they got heat up there. Remember, this was built in 1848. And here's one of the people adjusting the pipes. Now, this is an important building that's still there. Now it's the campus bookstore, but this is where the laundry was. And as you can imagine, with that many, the Genesee Wesleyan Seminary during its most active years, which would be up until right after World War I, they averaged almost 600 students. So they had a big enrollment up there. And with a big enrollment, you get a lot of laundry. And here's the laundry after it's been done, waiting to be delivered to the students' rooms. And again, we have our trusty wood stove over here on the side. This is the gymnasium. And many of Lima's school kids, my generation, would go up there and play in the gym. But this is when it was first built in about 1909 with a cost of $15,000 back then. This is the building, about 1930. And unfortunately, this is the building in its later years, and it was subsequently torn down. The seminary simply didn't, or Elim didn't have the money to refurbish this at the cost that it would have been. Yeah, but here now we're going to back to 1918, and we see our females in the gym classes. I always thought those were bowling pins, but apparently that's what they were supposed to have been used for, instead of those kids knocking them down all the time. And here they go. Here you can see up here, Genesee Wesleyan Seminary 34 and the University of Rochester 31. Genesee Wesleyan Seminary played other schools all over the area. And here we have the gym before they added the wood paneling. Wood paneling would come a little bit later, kind of a flimsy backboard there, but it served a purpose. And now we go. This is a later photograph of the gym, and here's the wood paneling I was talking about, and here's a much better backboard. Now we go on to football, and here is the team from 1899. As you can see, they didn't have helmets then. They wore these nose guards, and only the guys that were the offensive front line would even bother wearing these. Everybody else just kind of went without helmets and without the nose guards. Finally, in 1905, we start to give them a little bit of padding, and they look more like what we would recognize today. Of course, he's still got his nose guard hanging off. And here the boys are about 1930. Finally, they gave them helmets. This must have been the Jerry Ford era when they started putting the helmets on. I love this guy. I don't know who he is, but that's a great pose. Just to back up to football for a second, to show you how seriously the college and the local population took their sports. In 1902, there was a football game between us and East High School. The only touchdown scored was by East High School, and the college lost. The population was so enraged, they brought the sheriff to arrest the coach, who was a college professor. He just coached as a sideline. The sheriff had to transport him out of town for his own safety. And there was a whole newspaper article written on it. But I just thought, wow, you know, we know how crowds are today, but man, they took their sports serious. And here's the young man in all his glory. Now we go on to our basketball team. This is the basketball team in 1912. We see the pennants. But I want to point this out. Genesee Wesleyan Seminary just kicked ass. They were the best of the best. These are your scores: 52 for 60 for Genesee Wesleyan, 8 for Livonia, 52, 31, 32, 16, 54, 49. Go all the way down to the bottom, you see the seminary accumulated 730 points. to the opponents at 404. You can see how far some of them came. Casanova, Mechanics Institute, which became RIT, Genesee, Palmyra, Marion, West High. They amazing team. Any football team today would love to have that record. And here we see the girls basketball team.
Ah,
Yeah, they got into it. Like I said, everything was open to them. It was their choice. Now, here's another reason why some of the photographs up at the Lima Historical Society are so great, because they wrote their names on the back. And then I just transferred them to the front. And here's, if you're from Lima, you're going to notice, you're going to know some of these names. Here's Salmon, who raised the, who had the pharmacy uptown for many days. Of course, the Berry family, Eidson, Butler, who lived out on Heath Markham Road. So a lot of our towns, forerunners got their education up there. I mean, you just couldn't go wrong. Your student could walk to class. Here's the baseball team in 1914. Now this, I am going to send to the George Eastman House. I know it is a magic slide, and I know it's 1914 because that's what, it's the same team. Now, if this was hand colored, it's the most amazing job of hand coloring I've ever seen. But I also know there weren't really color photographs at that time. So I'm going to send it to the Eastman establishment and see if they can tell me for sure that this is not a color photograph. Again, if I believe it's, but I mean, look at the texture of the grass here with the brown grass and the green grass. It's an amazing job of hand coloration, if that's what it is. And again, here we go. Here's our soccer season. And here's our baseball team. There's our soccer team. They built some bleachers out there. Here's the track team, pole vaulting. They had whatever you wanted. This was the tennis court out in front of Fowling Hall. And here you can see the Methodist cemetery that was across the street. This is Blake Hall. The building still exists. And that's what it looked like in 2004. That was the last time I was up there taking photographs. This was the president's house. I don't know if this was added later. It could have been. I think that somebody might have added it just to match the college hall. Later, when the Elim came, it was called Spencer House after Ivan Spencer. The music studio still there. That was the original door. And that's what the music hall looked like in 2004. This was Victor's house. And I believe that's still existing. I don't have a picture of it in today's era. This is the James Cottage. And this shows you what how they did with a black and white photograph and colorized it and then made a magic slide. Of course, you do lose a little bit of distinction detail. And this is the end, because it's now been almost an hour. I could not even possibly attempt to go into Elim, into the fraternities and the sororities, into the students, into the famous people that have been there. There is another whole presentation just on everything after, well, there was a public works, it was the National Youth Association went up there after the seminary closed. There was a Genesee Junior College, which Hilda Turk went to, and there's still a few students left alive. I communicate with them online, but anyhow, we will pick another time and I will come back and do part 2. And I thank you all very much for your attention. And I'm not sure how to get out of here. I'm going to hit escape. Well, that took me back to that anyhow.
That's You did great. I have to just share with everybody that you're all able to unmute yourselves if you'd like to ask a question. So please do. I'm sure that there are many. That was an incredible presentation. Really, I thank you so much for doing that. Any
Well,
questions from
I
anybody?
had to narrow it down from about 3,500 photographs.
That's all.
Yeah, that's all.
Any questions from our audience?
I don't have a question. I just have a comment. I was very interested to hear this because my grandparents, who were married in 1917, so before 1917, they both attended the college. My grandmother for music and my grandfather for accounting.
Oh, yeah, almost any Lima family was able to send their kids up there. The tuition was anywhere, well, of course, this is going way back, $1.50 per term up to $9 per term. Of course, in 1840s money, which would be a lot more. But I mean, it was very affordable.
This is Gary Albright. You might like to know that the first commercially successful color photographs were from 1907.
Really? All right. I'm going to write that down. Amazing. Was that here or in Europe?
The Lumiere brothers in Europe, but they
Okay.
were sold here too.
Okay.
It's called the Autochrome.
Yeah. Yeah, I know the Lumiere brothers. That's who Edison stole the motion picture from.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah, we don't talk about that. We're America. Of course, it was invented here.
Doug, this is Elizabeth Osta. I've spoken with you many years ago.
Yep.
And I'm delighted with this presentation and all the coming together of this whole story. I had an uncle who went to the seminary, and I was digging desperately to find the certificate. 1905, I believe he graduated with an 8th grade certificate. Does that make sense?
If it was an 8th grade certificate, I would guess that's from a one-room schoolhouse.
No, it says right on it. It's got the emblem, Genesee Wesleyan Seminary.
Okay.
Yeah, I gotta find
I'd
it
like
and
to
show
see
it
it
to you.
because I haven't seen that before. But
Yeah,
they did offer the scientific and classical were two broad spectrums. In
Mhm.
between, and it's right in their catalogs, they mention that they offer certificates in occupations and in other areas. So it could be very well that maybe he went to the 6th grade level and then went up there and finished his education. They gave him an 8th grade certificate. I wanted to point out one thing. One of the other reasons that Lima was picked over the other locations is a very successful Lima lawyer by the name of Mr. Bennett donated the 10 acres up at the top of the hill. Now, there's an interesting story with Mr. Bennett because he donated the 10 acres in 1830. That's when they were still discussing where to put the seminary. In 1839, attorney Mr. Bennett rode to Dansville for business and was never seen or heard of again. His horse was tied up to a tree, and that was it. He just vanished off the face of the earth. So a little twist there with the guy who donated the land, and I thought was pretty interesting.
Very.
So Doug, am I muted or not?
Not now.
Okay.
Wait,
Doug,
go ahead.
This is Colleen Plimpton. My grandfather,
Oh, hi, Colleen.
hello. My grandfather, Ralph Plimpton, has his initials carved into one of the bricks at the corner of College Hall. I understand a lot of young people did that back in the day, but there he is. There's his name.
Yeah, I think I have a photograph of that. And there's other classes would carve things in there. There's one brick that's the class of 1904, and there's a couple other bricks up there that have some etchings on them. Fascinating.
And there are some very poignant tombstones in the Methodist cemetery. I remember one in particular of a young man who was a student there and died of some disease. I thought he had died in the war, the Civil War, but no, he had died of some disease, and his parents apparently had him buried there across from the college. And so sad.
Yes, well, there are two cemeteries up there. One is Methodist Cemetery. The other is the College Cemetery, which was reserved for faculty. And there's only about 22 stones in the faculty cemetery. One thing I forgot to mention in the beginning was over 30,000 students have gone through Genesee Wesleyan Seminary. Well, we have one of the largest enrollments of any educational facility in Western New York. And again, as I said, their peak enrollment was 1,063 in 1851. There's also a really great story about the seminary students at the outbreak of the Civil War. Maybe some of you have heard it before, but anyhow, when President Lincoln called up for his 90,000 volunteers, the Methodist Episcopalian Church was very much anti-slavery. So several of the male students, many of the male students, in fact, volunteered for this call for 90,000 men to put down the rebellion. Well, the men went to the Washington, D.C. area, and they enlisted for 3 months. And I have actual letters from these guys complaining that they were eager to get into action, but all they did was sit around and drill. And they said all the officers are interested in is going to the parties in Washington, D.C., and that they were a bunch of drunks. Now, move along a little bit further. Their enlistment is up. They go back. Civil War breaks out in earnest, and eventually we have a draft. Guess what? These guys are exempt from the draft because they've already served. So it was the best decision they ever made. It kept them out of the Civil War.
Oh,
There's hundreds of stories up there, and I've been very lucky. I'm sure some of you know at the University of Rochester, the library, the Rush Lease, they have what's called the stacks. That's where you go. It's a winding metal staircase, and you go down into the bowels of the library, and here's all these unpublished manuscripts, and there's all kinds of collections down there. And you can go through and find out. Of course, I'm easily distracted. I might be looking for one thing and end up with the Genesee Valley Canal instead. And from that, I might, so also the University of Rochester, and of course, this is 30 years ago when I was doing this. They weren't the friendliest organization to try and get a photograph out of. You really have to fill out a lot of paperwork. And then they bring it to you, and you can't really touch it. You got to put on the gloves. If you want to make a copy of it, you have to do it through them, and it costs a lot of money. I certainly hope it's improved, and I hope most of their stuff is online now, which would make it a lot easier for researchers.
Doug?
Yes, ma'am.
Is there much record at the in the seminary about the pandemic of 1918?
Not specifically. What's mostly up at the at Elim in the library are class photographs.
Yeah.
They have these big, heavy wooden drawers, and I've got all the class photographs from the 1870s all the way up into the 40s. And my goal is eventually to have a database of everyone who went through the seminary, or at least as complete as I can get it.
Wow.
Because most of the class photographs are identified with the students' names.
That's great.
But a lot of the Genesee Wesleyan Seminary went over to the county historian's office.
Hmm.
I was surprised to find out how much was over there.
Hmm.
And again, I couldn't do it without George Corby taking those wonderful black and white photographs, showing us what we normally wouldn't see. You unless it's in a catalog, you don't get many of the everyday photos in there. They're just going to show you the stage photos, and here's my publication.
A question. The word seminary kind of throws me here a little bit. It sounds like it started out as what we would consider a seminary, a training institution for those entering the clergy, and that changed at some point. Could you fill us in on that?
Well, most institutions of higher education were called seminaries originally. Dansville has the Dansville Seminary, which was not religiously affiliated with anything. It later became the King Daughters Home, and it still stands today. Lima Seminary, not only as an educational facility, but it was backed by the Methodist Episcopalian Church. So there would have been a little bit of a push toward the religious. I believe that mandatory attendance to religious services, at least during the first year, might have been in place. One of the reasons the seminary closed was the Methodist Church would no longer support the seminary because we no longer had an active Methodist church in Lima. The Methodist Episcopalian Church on Rochester Street closed, I think, I'm just going off the top of my head here, in the 50s, because there was a terrible windstorm. It knocked down one of the towers. There used to be 2 towers there. It wasn't repaired. The roof gave in. And by that time, the membership, apparently the Presbyterian, the Baptists, and the Catholics took over. Probably the Baptists. They were the fastest growing church back then, but the Methodist enrollment for the church declined to the point where they couldn't contribute any monetary funds. And so for the Methodist Church that oversaw the seminary, that was the last straw. I also want to point out in the early days when Joyce Rapp was really hot on this about the college hall becoming the nucleus of Syracuse University. Joyce didn't think that was true. I've seen different opinions. The last one was the court ruling in 1869, which ordered the Genesee College to turn over all its libraries and all its apparatus and labs and everything, plus the money, to the seminary. But where the confusion comes from is Syracuse University themselves claim that they started in Lima. So I'll have to see what else I can dig up on that. And but again, I kind of have to default to Syracuse University. If they say they began in Lima, I'm going to have to probably take their word for it. I haven't read the whole court document. It was a big write-up at the time. But again, seminary always makes us think of a religious organization today, but not so much back then, perhaps. Bill, all I can see is top of your head.
That was wonderful. I can't thank you enough, Doug. And I want to just mention to everybody, Doug has been very gracious and forfeited the idea of an honorarium tonight. So thank you for doing this free of charge. That's very gracious of you. We
remember, all these photographs are going to be a Flickr that Drew will post on the Honeoye Falls or the Mendon Honeoye Falls Historical Society, so that you can all get in and view them at your leisure. And if you want, you can download them, put them on your own computer, do whatever you want with them. They're yours to use.
Let's all get off of mute and give Doug a round of hearty applause.
Yay.
If I'd known I was gonna be on TV, I would have wore a better shirt. But this is the Florida uniform. It's a t-shirt and shorts. Anything else, we ask you to leave.
Great.
Well, thank you very much.
Very gracious. Again. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Going once, going twice.
Okay.
All right, everybody. Have a great night and have a great 2022. And we look forward to seeing you at some future programs. Please keep an eye on our website and on Facebook. And if you are not a member and you'd like to join, you can get our form and our program on our website at hfmhistorical.org. Thank you very much and have a wonderful night.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
I gotta turn it on.